Hello, my name is Tali Loewenthal, and I'm going to be showing you a little PowerPoint explaining something about the course Hasidism and Modernity. So this course, Hasidism and Modernity, it's 15 credits, it's half a course unit, running just in the first term this year. There's no exam, but there are 2 essays, and for further information, you can contact me. Now, Hasidism and Modernity is really a special case of the general issue of modernity versus tradition. You see, on the side of tradition, we have faith in God, law, religious law, the law of the country, the law of tradition, hierarchies, social hierarchies, religious hierarchies. And then comes modernity with secularism, revolution, equality, and and of course enlightenment and education for people as a whole, breaking through many barriers. And so there's the question, how does tradition face up to modernity? And that's a very general question in modern history. And Hasidism and modernity is a particular and interesting, in my view, interesting case. So what is Hasidism? Well, it began in 18th century Eastern Europe, spread through the Eastern European Jewish communities, reached the land of Israel, and after the Holocaust and the scattering of Jewish refugees, they're now Hasidim in many Jewish communities. Now, what characterizes Hasidism? We might say traditional faith, mystical spirituality, passion in religious observance, close personal and communal relationships. And in the modern context, there are distinctive dress codes. 100 years ago, they may not have been, or 200 years ago, they may not have been so obvious, but they are distinctive now. They have large families. Now, Hasidic spirituality, for example, one form of that is dance, and Hasidic dance is quite well known. And so here we have Braslav Hasidic dancing at the grave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the 2nd century sage in Meron in North Israel, who's understood as the author of the sacred Zohar. So let's see if we can see them dancing. So Hasidic prayer is another aspect of Hasidic spirituality. The early Hasidim were noted for enthusiastic prayer and criticized for it. They would pray with intense feeling called dveikut, literally cleaving to the divine. And there were various styles of mystical and contemplative prayer which developed. Braslav's noted for a technique of personal speaking to God in one's own language in a solitary place at night, a place so lonely that even during the day, no one goes there. Well, here's an artist representation by Zalman Kleiman, and it is set in a synagogue in New York around 1970. And we have here a group of people who are contemplatives. The community as a whole have prayed and have gone home or are in the Kiddush in another room. But this group of people, the time is something like 1:55, and they are thinking or singing or deeply involved in the process of prayer in a very, very individual way. Now, this character here hasn't even begun to pray yet, and he's rather like a Kotzker style of prayer, where one thinks and thinks, walking up and down the room, thinking until you can find the point within yourself from which you're able to pray. The others, this one is in a very particular Chabad style of very, very deep contemplation, entering a kind of spiritual realm, and this person might not be accessible. If you spoke to him, he might not hear you. Of course, the question here is, as in the previous slide, what about the women, the wives, the daughters? Where are they? Are they also dancing somewhere? Are they also engaged in contemplative prayer? That is one of the questions about the Hasidic movement. What is the role of women? The relationship with the Rebbe, now that's a crucial concept. And that also, there is the question to what extent the Rebbe and women in the community relate together. In some communities, very strongly so. In all communities, the Rebbe has a strong spiritual resonance for each member of the community, ideally. And he's a spiritually empowered person who feels a connection with his followers. He's got a responsibility to inspire and guide them. And he teaches them. And when he passes away, his grave becomes a place of pilgrimage. So here's the Hasidic gathering with the Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1970. There is the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He might be speaking some kind of Talmudic discourse or Kabbalistic discourse. Which would be transcripts of it would be made later, and those became many books containing his teachings. Here's another kind of Hasidic Tisch. Tisch means a table, and the Hasidim would gather at the table of the Rebbe, of the Hasidic leader, and sing, and it would be a very spiritual atmosphere. Now, the women may be looking on from behind a curtain. That's certainly, that's more common in recent decades. Here's a photo snatched of a spirited Hasidic gathering. You see this man dancing on the table. Everyone has had a little bit to drink. You can see the bottles on the table and all kinds of spiritual ideas being bandied about. Another aspect, given that we spoke about what happens when the Rebbe passes away, in 16th century Tzfat in North Israel, the Kabbalists stressed the mystical significance of visiting the grave of a tzaddik, of a great spiritual figure. The interesting thing about Hasidism is that it had living tzaddikim, living such figures, and being associated with them was what the Hasidic movement was all about. But however, when a great figure such as a Rebbe would pass away, his grave again became a spiritual focus. And Rabbi Nahman of Braslav's Ohel, his grave in Uman in the Ukraine, is a contemporary center that many people go to. Look at these crowds. These are all men, but there may be provision at other times for women to pack there as well. Here is a grave not very often visited. It's the Kotzker Rebbe's grave in Kotsk in Poland. He was a very special Hasidic Rebbe of the mid-19th century. Here we have the Lubavitcher Rebbe's grave. You have the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchok on the right, and Rabbi Nachum Mendel on the left, who passed away in 1994. Here we have a group of girls at that grave in a kind of a side room, saying psalms and other texts. Now, there's the whole idea of Hasidic dynasties. Many Hasidic dynasties came to an end in the Holocaust, but there are quite a number which continue. And the list here, which are really the names of the little shtetl where they began, or where there was their center. They all have communities in London. And this diagram tries to show the lines of descent. So it starts off with the generation of Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, going down to the second generation, Rabbi Dov Ber, the Maggid of Mezerich, and then the generation of his students, and then down to the present day contemporary Hasidic communities in London N16, Stamford Hill. And you can see that usually there's some kind of connection of a disciple or a son bringing the dynasty down to the next generation. But in some cases, like this white wavy line, Rabbi Nahman passed away in 1810, and there was no successor, but nonetheless, Braslav continues very vigorously. Now, we then have, that's Hasidic spirituality. We then have the onset of modernity, and modernity as it is in its 20th century form and now 21st century. So here we have what constitutes modernity in our thinking. Does a mobile phone, an iPhone, constitute modernity? Well, it certainly does in many ways, but let's try to analyze them in a number of different aspects. Science, of course. Modernity is the development of science, 18th century, 19th century, into our century, incredible advances in science. And science is based on and perhaps promotes rationalism. In other words, rational thinking, which may sidestep or do away with faith altogether, in which case you have secularism. So that's one aspect of what's going on in people's minds during the process of modernity. But there are other things happening as well. Max Weber wrote that due to economic change, there was a breakdown in traditional relationships. As he put it, brothers become others. The fact that you and your grandfather did business with some other person's grandfather 2 generations ago, that in the traditional context, Weber writes, would mean that you would do business with the grandson. But now there's a new issue. There's the profit motive. People are looking for more profit. So maybe it's better not to do business with him, but to do business with someone else. And so in that sense, brothers become others. An interesting aspect of modernity is individualism, the focus on the individual. And also the idea of constant change. New is ultimate good. And empathy, the idea of feeling what another person is feeling. That's a very important aspect of modernity. And egalitarianism, of course, equality, breaking down hierarchies. So these are aspects of modernity. And the question is, what happened to Hasidism when it was doused with 20th century and now 21st century modernity? So has Hasidism changed? How has it changed? If you look at the end of this page, you can see the question, has Hasidic spirituality really survived? Well, that's a good question. However, let's try and see how it tried to cope. There was the creation of Hasidic enclaves, trying to be sheltered from the media, maybe from the iPhone, and other secularizing influences. Some groups took a different path or parallel path at the same time, deepening of the understanding of the ethos of Hasidism, understanding more clearly what Hasidism is about. And in that way, you can ride the waves of modernity. Another aspect is revealing modernistic elements in Hasidic thought and life. The quest for constant spiritual change, that's actually there in some Hasidic groups. There are indeed certain forms of egalitarianism as well. In some groups, there's strong focus on the spiritual power of the individual. So these are ways in which we might talk about Hasidism as another modernity. Now, the topics we explore in the course include topics such as faith versus reason. Must faith be blind? Here we have a book by Kant, The Critique of Pure Reason. Now, it would be surprising for many people to put lessons in Tanya by Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Ladi, a great Hasidic leader of the late 18th, early 19th century. But in fact, he was accused by some of his Hasidic colleagues of being too rational. So, and he claimed that reason does have a role in religious observance and reflection about the divine. It's not just faith. Faith has to be drawn into reason, he claimed. Then another topic is women in Hasidism. Are women sidelined? Are women seen as equal to men? Can a woman become a Rebbe? That's been an issue. Famous articles have been written about this. Can she be a source of Hasidic spirituality in her home, or even in society at large? So here we have the question of the role of women in Hasidic thought. And here in the case of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, we have a picture of him giving a talk to a group of women, intending to empower them spiritually. And so really he does believe that women are significant and have spiritual power, which they can use both in their homes and in society at large. Another question relating to womanhood is, are the Hasidim ascetics? Many kinds of mysticism have an ascetic, world-denying aspect. Now, that's not very typical of Judaism, and one could explore how that might be in Hasidism. Another question is individualism and collectivism. Hasidic society is a kind of group, and you can think of it as collectivist society. Victor Turner used this interesting term, communitas. He didn't write about Hasidim. He wrote about other groups, but the term communitas can be applied to the Hasidim. A group with a special ethos, something special that they feel they share. Now, apart from that, male Hasidim generally wear similar clothes. Hasidim typically ask the Rebbe where to live, what job to do, who to marry. So we have the question, can a Hasid be considered an individual? Is it really an individual aspect to his life or her life, or is he just operating as part of a collective? That's something that could be discussed. What about relating to people outside Hasidism? How does it relate to Jews who are not Hasidim or not observant at all, or to non-Jews? So here we have a picture from a Chabad publication about the Noahide code and values. The Lubavitcher Rebbe spoke about the duty, based on Maimonides, the duty that the Jew has to communicate spiritual values to society at large, which is an interesting concept, but it's only found in Chabad Hasidism, among other groups of Hasidim. But outside Hasidism, there were some figures such as Rabbi Dr. Solomon Schonfeld in London, who wrote a book actually aimed at non-Jews and presenting the Bible to them as a moralistic teaching which was relevant to them. Then we have topics like Zionism and Messianism, and the whole question of how Hasidism relates to these concepts. And finally, we can talk about Hasidism as a cultural factor. Can Hasidism contribute to our modern and postmodern world? Can it function as a universal cultural factor? Now, this book you see over here, Social Vision, is written by several figures. One is Philip Wexler, another is Eli Rubin, who is currently a PhD student in our department at UCL. So he believes with his co-authors that it is possible to take Hasidic concepts and make them into a transformative paradigm for the world. Well, we might explore the rationality of that and see whether we agree or not, or someone might write an essay about it. Well, thank you very much. So that presents to us, hopefully, a brief outline of the course Hasidism and Modernity. All the best.